Disclaimer. This video does not constitute a denial of the existence of black Jews or the existence of Jews in West Africa, nor does it constitute a denial that Jews were among the Portuguese who went to Portugal's colonies in West Africa or the islands off the coast thereof. This video seeks to provide an example of why it is important to check sources, one's own sources, as well as the sources presented by others. Greetings. I was just looking at this thread in a discussion on Facebook, and without intending anything against the gentleman who posted the thread, I wanted to briefly show this in a video, in a very brief video, as I think it serves as an example of how people need to check their sources. Now, the post begins with some claims about cursive Hebrew and the Solitreo script appearing on the pews at First African Baptist Church in Savannah, Georgia. I think those who are familiar with my channel know that I've gotten into that subject fairly thoroughly, so I don't think there's any need for me to go into more detail on that topic here. But if you're not familiar with my channel and would like to discuss the pews with me, feel free to leave a comment, whether in the comment section of this video or in the comment sections of one of my past videos on the pews. But in this video, however, I wanted to jump ahead to this section here. And it reads as follows, quote, "How did these slaves end up in Savannah, Georgia? Where did they come from? The black Jews of Spain and Portuguese, or Portugal, were called the Negro Portuguese and were exiled to St. Thomas and Angola in West Africa and converted to Roman Christianity through death or torture. According to the El Libro Negro de Vaticano, or the Black Book of the Vatican, a book that was written and documented to carry out the orders of the Holy Roman Inquisition, it is documented 5 times that the Negro Jews were to be sent to St. Thomas or Angola, which again is in West Africa. Through court-documented orders, the evidence simply shows that the orders of the owners were to take on a cargo of slaves and proceed to St. Thomas and then to Georgia, the home port of Savannah, the place of ultimate destination. The presumption is that of a lawful purpose, such as to carry the slaves to Savannah. This explains why these slaves wrote a Sephardic script of Hebrew on the pews of the church and knew that they were Israelites. They came from Spain or Portugal to St. Thomas to Savannah, Georgia. History book, Opinions of the Court Claims, 1886 to 1911, printed for the Committee on War Claims, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C., 1912. Okay, and then he shares a number of images, and I'd like to look at a couple of these. So first, we're going to look at this image, and he, on the left, you see not so much the title, but the nickname, apparently, of the work that he was referencing, El Libro Negro del Vaticano. And then on the right, you see he gives a sort of partial excerpt. It says, page 299, quote, "And shall be sent to the galleys, and if female, she shall be exiled to the island of Principe, St. Thomas, or Angola." And then a second image is this one, where it says, it's quoting this source, which I'll mention in a second. It says, quote, "When the evidence simply shows that the orders of the owners were to take on a cargo of slaves and proceed to St. Thomas and thence to Georgia, the home port was Savannah, the place of ultimate destination, the presumption is that of a lawful purpose, such as to carry the slaves to Savannah," and end quote. And then the source there you see is Opinions of the Court Claims, 1886 to 1911, printed for the Committee on War Claims, House of Representatives, Washington, D.C., 1912. Okay, so juxtaposing these two images, we're told that the top text has Jews being sent to St. Thomas, and then the bottom text has them being sent from St. Thomas to Savannah, in Savannah, Georgia, in the United States. But let's take a little closer look at the relevant sources. The first image is referencing text from the second volume of a work titled A Narrative of the Persecution of Hipólito Joseph da Costa Pereira Furtado de Mendonça, which also includes certain rules that govern the Inquisition in Lisbon. And here's page 299 from that work, where you see a certain person, hearing his sentence and his penance, and it's talking about stripping him of goods, which he had during the time of which he committed the relevant crime. And then you see the relevant text where it says, it's about 5 lines down. It said, "Shall be sent to the galleys, and if a female, she shall be exiled to the island of Principe, Sao Tome, or Angola, and each shall suffer the punishment of whipping," etc., etc., right? So notice the text doesn't explicitly say anything about Jews, and when you scroll up, you find out what this is. It says here, this is Title 14 of wizards, sorcerers, diviners, and those who conjure the devil and have a contract or agreement with him or use the art of judiciary astrology. And as you go through this, this was referring not to anything having to do with Judaism or anything like that, much less Israelite lineage. It pertains to people practicing sorcery. The Inquisition was apparently exiling people who were convicted of sorcery or of witchcraft to Sao Tome, or also Angola or Principe. They were exiling, the Inquisition in Lisbon was exiling people to these Portuguese colonies off of the coast of West Africa. Now, as for the second source the gentleman referenced, that was from page 505 of a work titled Opinions of the Court of Claims in French Spoliation Cases, 1886 to 1911, which, as he himself noted, was printed for the U.S. House of Representatives in 1912. And here's page 505 of that work. You see the relevant text at the top of the screen, which had appeared in his excerpt, right? It says, I'll reread it here. It says, when the evidence simply shows that the orders of the owners were to take on a cargo of slaves and proceed to St. Thomas and thence to Georgia, the home port was Savannah, et cetera, right? Okay, so he's proposing that this is, we saw in the previous source a reference to people being exiled to Sao Tome, and now you see a reference to people being brought from Sao Tome to Savannah. However, if one would just read a little bit lower on the page, it states as following. Here's the further details. It's a bit of an elaboration. It says, the brig Sally, John V. Villette being the master, sailed on a commercial voyage on or about the 7th day of June, 1796, from Newport, Rhode Island, bound for Africa, where she arrived on the Gold Coast in the month of August following. The master of the Sally purchased a cargo of slaves and set sail for Savannah, Georgia, intending to touch on the way at the Danish island of St. Thomas, probably for supplies. So just to be clear here, it's referring to the Danish island of St. Thomas. The formerly Danish island of St. Thomas is not the same place as the former Portuguese colony known as Sao Tome. You see, the erstwhile Danish island, which was known as St. Thomas, is in the Caribbean. It's now part of the U.S. Virgin Islands because it was handed from Denmark to the United States with the Treaty of the Danish West Indies back in 1917. Meanwhile, Sao Tome, the former Portuguese colony, which is known as Sao Tome, is off the coast of West Africa. It's in a completely different hemisphere and got its independence from Portugal in 1975. These are two different places, roughly 5,000 miles apart. So to sum up what we saw here, while the way that the excerpts were presented made it seem like the relevant sources had Jews being sent to Sao Tome and then from there to Savannah, the reality is that neither source mentioned Jews, neither page of the relevant sources mentioned Jews, and the first source had to do with people being convicted of witchcraft being sent to Sao Tome, the Portuguese colony of Sao Tome. Meanwhile, the second source had to do with slaves being brought to a different place, which was also called St. Thomas, but this was a Danish colony, which is in the Americas. All right, two completely different places. So the two sources that were being combined were actually pretty much unrelated. Now, again, as I close this video, I just want to say that it's not my intention to pick on the gentleman who made the thread which inspired this video. The lesson that I'm attempting to convey here is simply that everyone should check their sources. And perhaps so, too, one should check the sources of those one is engaging with online. I believe the gentleman who started the thread is a fan of people like Ron Dalton and Benaiah Israel. And with all due respect to those gentlemen, you really do need to check the sources that they're referencing, because they get a little fast and loose with some of their sources, as has been shown in previous videos, not only on my channel but on other channels. But with that, I'll close here. As always, I look forward to any comments, questions, or criticisms. I don't censor anyone here, so feel free to share your thoughts, whether positive or negative. And with that, God bless.